Hello, I'm John Fender. I'm Professor of Macroeconomics at the University of Birmingham. I'd like to talk about two important problems we have in the UK at the moment and two suggestions I'd have for, if not solving these problems, at least mitigating them. The first problem we have is a high inequality of income and wealth, and the second problem is a fairly massive housing problem. I think we all know that housing is very expensive and a lot of younger people find it impossible or very difficult to get onto the housing ladder. And of course, these problems are not unrelated. My first suggestion, policy-wise, is to reform council tax. Council tax, which is the one local tax we have in the UK at the moment, is unsatisfactory in a number of ways. In particular, it's based on 1991 valuations, and it also implies a very regressive relationship between the value of a property and the council tax payable. For example, in Westminster, where council tax is lowest in the UK, you could have a £20 million property and pay less than £1,400 council tax, whereas there other parts of the country where you pay much more council tax on much cheaper properties. The proposal for reforming council tax I'd have is something which has been suggested a number of times by distinguished people, and it would involve imposing a proportional tax. It could be a tax of about 1% on the best estimate one can have of the current market value of a property. So a ballpark rate, as I said, would be 1%. So if one has a £250,000 house, one would pay £2,500. Now, it's easy to see how this would affect the distribution of income and wealth. Particularly those at the bottom would benefit and those at the top would suffer. And it would contribute towards solving the housing problem in as much as it would be easier to buy cheaper properties. However, there is a major problem as far as implementing it, namely that a lot of people who live in expensive properties would find their council tax bills would rocket, and given that a number of these people are influential politically, they would undoubtedly lobby to prevent it. So this is where my second policy proposal comes in, and that is to do with stamp duty, which is the tax on the purchase of property. It's rather different from council tax, where there's a regressive relationship between the price of a property and the tax. With stamp duty, the relationship between the tax and the price of the property is extremely progressive, and the tax rises to 15%, or it can be 15% on properties over 1.5 million. Now, I think it's important, given that given the housing crisis we have at the moment, that the housing stock we have be used efficiently, that people aren't sort of under-occupying property, that people who had large families but whose families have moved away be perhaps encouraged to move from large properties to smaller properties. But the cost of moving house does deter this to some extent. So my proposal would be to reduce rates of stamp duty quite markedly. Perhaps one could have a top rate of about 2%. And this would, of course, encourage people to buy and sell properties, and hence would ensure that the existing housing stock is utilised much more efficiently. Now, it would also help mitigate the political problem I mentioned as far as council tax, because in reducing the stamp duty payable on more expensive properties, one would tend to raise the value of these properties. So that would offset to some extent the negative effect of the increase in council tax. And it would also mean that one could cut stamp duty without giving a bonanza on balance to rich people. One would imagine the headlines if a policy proposal came in which just reduced stamp duty, bonanza for the wealthy, all that. By combining the two proposals, I think one can mitigate the political problems associated with either and make some progress, perhaps not massive progress, but some progress towards solving the two problems, the problems of inequality and the housing problem I mentioned earlier. So if anybody is interested in developing these proposals, please do get in touch.